I want to welcome everyone to NFARL. This obviously is a special meeting that we're having, and it's a celebration of Jim Stafford Quaker Oats. I can only think of Quaker Oats when I think of Jim, so it's W4QO Quaker Oats. And it's a celebration of Jim's life and what a life he had. So rather than taking a lot of time, because we have a lot of speakers, I want to go ahead and start with the first speaker and bring them up and let them convey what they want to the group about Jim. So the first speaker we've got is Chuck Catledge, AE4CW. So I'll just go ahead and invite Chuck up and turn it over to him.
We will leave the lights up.
We can actually turn the lights on. Jerry, what do you want?
Well, good evening, everybody. I think we're all here with a mixed feeling of grateful gratitude for everything Jim has done, and also the fact that everything he did, not only for us, but for ham radio in general. I'm here just as one of many representatives just to say a few things about Jim from my own personal recollections. So let me start with that. Jim Stafford W4QO became a silent key on December the 27th. But his legacy that Jim left behind will not be silent. The impact on ham radio, and most noticeably on the people of ham radio, will remain with us for many decades to come. Jim was the most uniquely inspiring person that I've ever known. And listen to this. Every person he met became his friend before their conversation had finished. Every opportunity to introduce people, especially youngsters, to ham radio was his passion. Helping new hams get on the air was his delight. Lending his equipment to hams who needed a radio was second nature. And he also loved spending endless hours teaching the art of CQ to any and all. That was his calling. And maybe one of his most interesting and impactful ones was the reinvigorating of a club that was about to be on the brink of extinction back in the 2000s. He thrived on doing those kind of things. And leading people to do far more than they ever thought possible was his love. Jim didn't think very highly of himself, and those of you who knew him personally, I think, would agree with that. He would much rather see other people succeed in what they were doing than be recognized for what he did. And even when he was honored as the first ever ham of the year in the whole United States in the year 2010, he humbly said, "I don't deserve this." And he really, really meant he didn't think he deserved it. But that was Jim. Now, thinking about all this raises a question for us, I think, and that is, what can each of us do to honor Jim and his legacy? Here's something I think Jim might have said. Be passionately committed to attracting and mentoring folks into the delights of ham radio. If we did that, and Jim was looking in on us, I think he'd say, "Job well done." Rest in peace, my friend. Now, I have another recognition of Jim's impact on their lives from Mac, W4AX. Mac was not able to be with us tonight. He asked if I would read this for him. Jim Stafford was one of the finest men I've ever known. His kind spirit, generosity, and giving attitude were absolutely remarkable. Jim and I first met when he jump-started the North Fulton Club in 2004. That's the time he resurrected the club along with a handful of folks, some of which are here tonight. We worked together to build interesting programs and increase the membership, and Jim had boundless energy and great new ideas, especially with youth. The theme was always around elmering and bringing new blood into ham radio. We developed a deep friendship and traveled to dozens of ham fests together over the years. I particularly remember our trip to the major European ham fest in Friedrichshafen, Germany. Jim was instantly at home with hams from countries around the world, and I'm sure you can imagine that. He had never met a stranger. He came away with so many new ideas, like youth kit building that later became a staple for the North Fulton Club. Jim was a celebrity wherever he went, and was widely known as the past president of the Worldwide QRP Club and the first ever United States Ham of the Year. Jim was always helping others and easily helped over 200 people, new hams rather, get licensed and get on the air by installing antennas for them, loaning them a radio if needed, and much more. He was the driving force behind Field Day and always ensured we had a first-class CW station. And you all know that Jim loves CW. Jim is the heart and soul, and rather, let me say this more accurately, Jim was and is the heart and soul of the North Fulton Club. He was one of my true friends in life, and I miss him so very greatly. I know that he's at peace and not suffering. My life has been blessed by knowing Jim. He was one of a kind, and I think we'd all agree with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck. And I'll ask Fred Moore to come up. Fred has a few words he'd like to say about Jim.
Okay, good evening all, and I'm very sad to say I miss Jim as well. And it's kind of hard to beat what Chuck has said about Jim, but I met Jim probably in the very late 80s or 90s, somewhere in there, when he was working for or when he was working for the phone company, and he helped start a club down there called Matt Park. And you know, he was always interested in trying to get people on the air and make things work, and like Chuck said, loan out equipment and help people. He was honestly a very helpful person. And like Jim said, or like Chuck said, back in, I think it was 2007, wasn't it, Chuck, when we restarted? You don't remember. Okay, well anyway, I think it was around 2007 when the North Fulton Amateur Radio League was about to close the doors, because the membership that was created in the club prior to that was all based on having an auto patch. And so the auto patches started disappearing because cell phones started reappearing, or appearing. And so we had a meeting, and this was going to be one of the last meetings, and Jim was there, and he volunteered to become the president of the club. We were told we would be better off if we didn't have any more dinners around our club meetings, and that would stymie the club meetings. So we didn't do dinners anymore, and our membership started growing, and I'm pleased to say that we have well over 300 members today. Jim was always, I went to Dayton with him on 5 days of May, and that was an interesting time in my life. We had, basically it was a QRP group, wasn't it? And so I spent 5 days watching the QRPers in Dayton, Ohio. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to Dayton, but if you haven't, you need to go at least once in your life. I don't know how many people they have, but I think it's around 20,000 or something close to that. And there was never a time that I could never go over and ask Jim for some help on some woodworking. He would always be more than happy to help me. There was never a time that if he asked me to help him do something that he needed help with, I would more than happy help him. He had a bed thing that he was doing for some youth group out in the southern part of Georgia at some group camp, and he was making bunk beds. I don't know how many he made, but he needed help in cutting the wood, getting pieces together, and that sort of thing. And he was involved in just about anything you could think about. So anyway, that's Jim Stafford, and I'm going to miss him. He was a wonderful person, and rest in peace. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Fred. I'd like to introduce everybody to Calvin Owens. Calvin Owens is Jim's grandson, and Calvin and I have been communicating back and forth, and Calvin has made a decision that he's going to get his license and get an extra class license so that he can get Jim's call sign. And I think that is just outstanding. So now that the pressure is on him, he can't back out. I figured I'll tell everybody he knows he has to do it now. So, all right, Calvin. Calvin would like to say a few words about his grandfather. So this time I'd ask Calvin to come up here.
Hey, folks. I know I've met some of you in the past. Recovering from being sick, so I didn't have time to prepare much. But this season has been really tough for my family to lose someone who, in conversation time and time again, we realized was just so permanent in our lives. I grew up just down the road from my grandpa, so I was able to see him, multiple times a month at seasons of my life. Was there on holidays, was always at his house on Christmas morning opening gifts, was always around his table at Thanksgiving. And his words and his prayers were always in my ears. And just his influence in my life is evident. But I think when I think of my grandpa, the thing that I think I see most was just his permanence and his contentment with who he was and what he wanted to do with his life. And I just see that in the way that he led his family, in the way that he led me as a grandson, in the way that he led you as a community. And it just really stuck with me. And as I kind of process and begin to think about how do I kind of live on from this, and as these old men in my life pass away, and as their advice, is just distant memory, and isn't something that I can actively go seek out. It's like, how do I, go on in the legacy that he left, and in conversations that I've had, and prayers that I've prayed, and in thoughts that I've, been processing. It's just being that for other people. I think Jim was just almost like a staple or a just anchor in all of our lives that we could go to, whether we needed help with something, a friend to talk to, or just someone that we always knew would show up and would be there if we really needed him. And I think I'm just encouraged by that, to see that in just someone that I love so dearly, and so dearly loved me, and I know so dearly loved all of you. So it's been a hard season, for sure. But at the same time, there's so much joy that I have being able to walk in his legacy, being able to carry his middle name as Calvin, and to walk that out for not only the people that I'm presently around, but also my family for the future, and being able to look them in the eyes and tell them stories of their, would-be great-grandfather, of how, just intentional and careful he was with his words, and how seasoned with salt his life truly was. And I've just, replayed moments in my mind and processed things as this kind of season has come upon us, and it's been upon us for a little while. But time after time, it's just been his prayer of, God, thank you for the many blessings that we have, and be with those who are less fortunate than us. This being prayed in the middle of almost a 10-year battle with all different forms of illness and disease and cancer and all of these things. He's missing an eye, yet at the same time we hold hands around a table and he says, be with those who are less fortunate, and be with those who don't have what we have. And it's like, that's the life that I think we all know Jim lived. And to have him pass and to have him, you know, leave that legacy with us. It's like, yes, mourn, yes, feel those feelings, but at the same time live on and be that for someone else, be that for the people around you and the people who look to you for wisdom and advice and counsel and peace and love, and be that for the people that you can, whether it's a small community, but it's your small community of existence, of humanity, that God works through you and God uses you to be that to other people. And I think Jim modeled that so well for me, for Mike, for my mom Alicia, just as someone who was permanent, as someone who was there. And I think what I realize is that I can just be that for my family. I think Jim modeled that well, and now I just need to carry the torch. So, thank you, John. Thanks, y'all.
Calvin, you are a prime example of what Jim stood for. I mean, absolutely, if all of us followed suit like you're following your grandfather, it'd be a different world and a different place. So carry on. You're going to do excellent. Jim has given you a tremendous foundation. Thank you for what you had to say about your grandfather. Steve Randall, you are ready to say a few words?
Well, hello, guys. I'm probably the last one that deserves to be up here talking about Jim. You guys have, all of you, most of you have so much more history with him than I do. And I've struggled to write down all of these things, but I think I'll just put it in my pocket. But I met Jim very early on in my ham radio career, which has been kind of short. I used to hear him on the repeater all the time, going to his favorite restaurant, and found out about the CW chat thing and thought, well, I can jump in there and see if I can get some knowledge from this guy. This was during the height of COVID, so there was nothing really going on, no meetings, everything was just Zoom. But Jim and I became very fast friends, as several of you have already said. You make friends with Jim the minute that you meet him. Well, that happened with us, certainly. And he sort of took me under his wing, I think, and taught me. It was almost like he knew there wasn't that much time, and he wanted to teach me everything that he could during the time that we had. And I tried the very best I could to absorb it. I wasn't really even interested in CW when I became a ham, and I just probably would have become a ham a long time ago had I known that there was no CW requirement anymore. But I ended up going to CW chat because that's where Jim was, and I wanted to be there, and it was one of the places where I knew he would always be. And so he certainly got me bitten with the bug, and now it seems like that I have to try to do the best I can to try to carry on his legacy in that, and try to help the new hams that we have coming along learn CW and do some of those kind of things that he tried so hard to do. He left us with so much great material for everybody to make it easy to learn like I did. Also, I mean, without Jim, I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am in the club. I wouldn't be the activities chair. I wouldn't be doing Tech Talk. I wouldn't be doing CW chat. I wouldn't be doing any of that. And so, as one of you guys said, that Jim had the ability to get people to do things that they didn't know they were capable of, or weren't sure they were going to be able to do. And I still don't feel worthy of any of those tasks, but do the best that I can to carry on his legacy, because his legacy needs to live on long and far. His methods as far as CW are greatly ingrained in my head. I have all of his material. I'm going to do everything I can do to use his methods and bring people along, like John over there, Tom back there, and Tammy, and some other people that are joining us and learning to do what Jim loved. But anyway, I'm not going to take up a lot of your more of your time because it sounds too much about me and not enough about him. The reason is that I've only knew Jim for about a year, but he made as big of a difference in my life as anyone that I've ever met. I miss him terribly every day. And rest in peace, Jim, and we'll catch you down the log. I hope not very soon.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, Steve's a prime example of what Jim could convince people to do. You know, no one knew how to say no to Jim, and this man couldn't say no, and look what it got him. It got him a wonderful, wonderful adventure. So with that, I would like to ask Wes Lamboli if he would come up and say a few words.
Hi, everybody. I thought I'd write things down because you start talking about Jim and you just you lose your train of thought. I'm so sorry he's gone. But I kind of tried to epitomize Jim Stafford. What I came up with, you know, the only thing we have in this whole life is our own time. And Jim gave his very, very generously. If you've seen, as everybody's been saying tonight, as a woodworker, he built, among other things, he was a significant craftsman. He built over 30 bunk beds for his church's disadvantaged youth camp. It was a huge job. And I think his website called By Jiminy has been taken down now, but you can see some of the craftsmanship he had. He built things, and he also taught woodworking. He followed in his dad's footsteps as a craftsman and also as a devout Christian. I think his dad was a minister, if I remember right. Another item that Mac is not here tonight, but Mac and I decided that Jim ought to be nominated at the Dayton Ham Benches for Ham of the Year. It's the most prestigious award in all of Hamdom. We decided that he should know nothing about what we were doing. It should be a total surprise, because as you know, if Jim knew anything about Oh-No, he wouldn't want anything like that to happen. So we did it on the sly. So in doing some research about him, I found that he was awarded the Herb Breyer Award as Instructor of the Year back in 1992. This award is described as Herb S. Breyer, W9AD, longtime CQ novice editor, represented the spirit of effective and caring amateur radio instruction. The ARRL sponsors this award in conjunction with Lake County, Indiana Radio Club, and in his memory, they recognize the very best amateur radio instruction and recruitment. I saw the intensity of Jim's desire to see young people understand, construct, solder, and succeed in building ham radio projects and having fun doing it at Martha's, Mill Springs Academy, and other venues. For this and many other unselfish acts and accomplishments involving ham radio, Jim was awarded Ham of the Year in 2010. And I encourage you all to take a look at that Herb S. Breyer Award. If you look it up on ARRL and look at the requirements for it, it's just really daunting, and he did all these things. The other thing that nobody's mentioned tonight, but I think that Jim had a great sense of humor. And I know this is a fact because he laughed at all my stories. And a few years ago, Mac and Chuck and Jim and I had gone to the Southeast Dixon Contesting Convention, SEDCO, in Tennessee, and it lasted until about 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. And we decided we'd drive on back in spite of the hour. We were in Jim's truck. You remember this, Chuck? And Jim was driving, I was riding shotgun, and my job was to keep Jim awake. Chuck and Mac were in the back trying to sleep. So I told Jim a true story, which most of my stories are, about a dinner I spoke at, and Jim got to laughing so hard he got to crying, and he could hardly see to drive, and we're going 70 miles an hour through Knoxville at midnight, and I got crying too, and we had to slow down and wipe our eyes before we could go on. And I know, I as well as all of you know that we love Jim, we loved him, we have many great memories of being with him and enjoying his company, and I just say, rest in peace, my dear friend, I love you. I've got another, could I read this over here? This is from an anonymous person that knew Jim really well. And you've seen this picture around the Seagull Band, but this person was, she just can't, or I'm sorry, she can't believe that Jim's died. It can't be true. The other day, I found myself behind a MARTA bus that must have been designed by the Flock of Seagulls fans. From the rear, you can see two beams extending up along where the propane is, apparently. And then the back is got that infamous hairdo. The bus driver applied the brakes, and instantly I remembered that Jim had taught me that the da-da, space, da-da, space, da-da pattern is M-M-M. So this person, Morse code is ingrained in her. Just looking around when she's driving, see M in this case. So Jim still lives with her. I know that I am very blessed to be among those who met Jim, who talked and laughed with Jim, who got to learn from Jim, and got to watch Jim's interaction with so many people in so many contexts. In Jim's dictionary, a stranger is just a friend he hadn't met yet. Without a doubt, part of Jim's legacy in this number of people who consider him a friend, and the number of people he's taught myriad topics of ham radio. Of course, he's famous for teaching and sharing his passion for CW, but there are so many other areas of ham radio spectrum that he shared too. Jim appeared to thrive when he got others playing radio with him. His playing was quite educational and uplifting. As you will hear from other speakers, Jim was amazingly patient with someone who had made a mistake. As an ultimate teacher, he used such errors as there were planned teachable moments. This was so reassuring and encouraging to the world of folks with less experience than he. This was especially impactful for the young people he worked with. My memories of Jim span a little less than a decade, but they cover so many areas. I had the pleasure to travel with Jim to some Hamfests and other events, either in the same car in a tandem or multiple vehicles, talking on the radio all the way. He knew the best way to get somewhere, where to stay, what to eat, and what to do. Many laughs were exchanged along the way. The trip went quicker that way. Walking around Hamfest with Jim would easily take 4 times longer than you would ever think, because everybody wanted to stop and talk with him. How many hams and would-be hams did he welcome to the shack to play radio? Perhaps a little less than infinite. He invited me over when there was just out of the hospital a couple of years ago. He lay on the couch in an adjacent room, and he verbally guided me to get on the air. And many laughs were shared, and lots of patience shown. And to Marilyn, Jim's wife, thank you so much for generously sharing Jim with us. I trust you know how much he loved you. A guiding force driving him to get out of the hospital was his desire to get home to take care of you. The story of you letting Jim know that you had secretly earned your handwriting radio license, which meant you had to master CW without letting Jim know, may be the sweetest story ever. This was back when you had to know the code. Mike and Alicia, he was proud of you and proud of your following your interests in your chosen careers. Calvin, thank you for seeking to obtain Jim's license call. that will certainly help extend Jim's legacy. And I look forward to hearing you on the air, and if you need any help getting going or started, why, the whole club is behind you to get that, have it happen. The whole Stafford family, I respect it. You know that rumors of Jim's passing are true. I think we can all agree that we are happy that Jim is no longer in pain. But like you, we miss him physically being here with us on earth, and we extend to you our deepest sympathy. We mourn along with you. In conclusion, who in the world doesn't know Jim? I actually talked with someone who didn't know him a couple weeks ago. Certainly that was his loss. Other than that, it seemed that everybody knew Jim. Those of us who did know him need to continue his legacy, share what we know and enjoy, follow our interest in ham radio and science, never stop learning, never stop sharing what we've learned. Always turn strangers you meet into friends. I know that goodbye is a contraction of God be with you, which is certainly appropriate here, but instead of saying goodbye, I just want to say thank you, Jim.
Well, that was excellent, Wes, and excellent from the unknown person who said it all about Jim. And one thing that came to my mind as I listened to that, Jim was like a rock that you throw in a pond. When it hits the pond, there are all kinds of ripples that come out from it, and they continue to go out until they reach the shore. Those ripples are us. Those ripples are Calvin. All we've got to do is carry on the ripples and be the next rock going in the pond, because Jim was a boulder. He was more than just a rock. With that, I'd like to ask Phil Speck to come up.
Thank you, John. My name is Phil, K4PQC, and I live out in the boonies, in a little town called Bishop. Had maybe 200 people living there, and now with my wife and I, it's 202, so it's kind of small. But there's no way I could add to what Chuck and Fred and Wes and Kevin have added to Jim's life. They were all a part of it, and as I was. There's a couple of things that I'm going to try to bring to your attention, and that is why Jim was here and how you came about in meeting such a fine person. And I hope to be able to do that. It started a long time ago. I like to say back when the Earth's crust was first cooling, that I thought I knew Jim even before I met him. Tonight was the first night that I met Kevin. I knew Kevin long before I met him this evening. And when Jim arrived in Fort Lauderdale, I met him on the same day that he came, working for Southern Bell. Over the few years that I knew him there, he helped me do a lot of things. One of them was build a HF interface for my Model 35 teletypewriter, and using 741 ICs, which he introduced me to. It was an amazing little project, and one that really inspired me was that I was working on a project to try to come up with a map that would work in dispatching people. I had a crew that worked on a new carrier system. It was called T-Carrier. And I was trying to find a way in Fort Lauderdale to move people around that would be very efficient. There are a lot of obstacles in Fort Lauderdale. And one of the problems is that the whole town is covered with canals. Of course, streets are very easy. All of the roads go north and south and east and west. So you would think it's very easy, but everything has bridges. Everything is waterways. There's the intercoastal waterway. There's a lot of limited access highways, I-95, US 1, A1A. All of these canals and roads and bridges and make it hard to bring people around from one area to another. And I was working on it with my, at that time, Radio Shack TRS-80, trying to come up with a program. And Jim came over to the house. I lived right downtown. And Jim came over and looked at it, and he says, let me work on it a little bit. And probably just a few days later, Jim, with his Apple IIe computer, this was in the late 70s, it was probably late 77 or early 78, he came up with a program to be able to map the whole area into different sections. And he took the map, and of course the easiest way to take a map and come up with a minimum number of colors for little parts of it is 5, and that's what Jim did. Jim numbered all of these, and the numbers on adjacent places amounted to the differences of time in travel. So if it was moving one person to another location, it was easily done on the computer just by looking at the differences in time. And somebody might be just a stone throws away from where they needed to be, but it was easier to move somebody 20 miles away because these people had to drive 20 miles, go over bridges, and around obstacles. Jim came up with the program to do this in just a few days. He did get a lot of accolades and a lot of appreciation, and probably saved the company thousands of man-hours of travel by having this. It was quite something. Anyway, I ended up going up to New Jersey for 5 years. I was loaned up there. And while I was gone, a thing called divestiture took place. Well, during that time, Jim migrated to from Fort Lauderdale up to Atlanta. And I lived in Plantation. When I came back I was going to go, or thinking I was going to go back to my job in Fort Lauderdale. It didn't happen because of divestiture. Everything changed. Jim was in Atlanta, and he called me. In fact, he was doing some graduate work at Princeton in New Jersey and stayed with us in New Jersey, stayed with my wife and I, and two Yankee little kids that were born up there. When I came back to go to Florida, Jim says, there's an engineering job in Atlanta, why don't you come here? So I stayed with Jim and also Marilyn, and at their Roswell home, and he recommended that I look at a subdivision called Saddle Creek, and my wife and I bought a home there, lived there for 35 years until we moved to Bishop. But it was a pleasure staying with Jim and Marilyn, and I went to Alicia's wedding. That's why I think I knew Kevin before this evening, was because I went there to their wedding. Anyway, the things that people talked about with Jim, I could not add any more. Chuck spent probably as much time as anybody with Jim over the years when he was ill, both when he was comatose and when he was, wide awake. Probably very interesting conversations that they had, both at North Fulton and also at Kennestown. And I want to thank you for that, for taking care of my good friend. Changing the clock a little bit and explaining something to you. There was, before Jim was making all of the friends that he did here, he was doing the same thing in Fort Lauderdale. But before he got there was a fellow by the name of Fred Baker. Fred was W4 OTA. And Fred called me in his office several times. He was basically his chief engineer in the southeast area. He wanted me to come to work for him. And the last time I went to his office, he said, "Now this is the last time." He showed me a paper, said I could work 4 days a week at the telephone company in the engineering department. And on Fridays, I could go to FAU in Boca Raton and spend Saturday, get my engineering degree, and continue my trip in the Southern Belt. Well, I worked about 3 minutes from the office, and I would have had to gone to the headquarters building and spend 30 or 40 minutes driving. I would have had to buy another car because I worked, where I worked and where I lived was only just a few blocks apart, and I could walk there 10 minutes. I could drive there in 4. If I didn't have traffic, I could drive there in 2 minutes. But it was interesting. Anyway, I turned Fred down after talking to my wife and the fact that I would not be able to basically afford to take a new job. A few weeks later, Fred called me and said he wanted me to come to his office. There was a couple of people that he wanted to talk with me about. And gave me a piece of paper, and it was a single-page resume from a fellow that had gone to several nice universities, and I couldn't believe it. This fellow was not only well-educated, had a master's degree from MIT, even was a intern under the famous Dr. Bose. I don't know if you knew that or not, but everybody knows what Bose is, and so does Jim. Well, not only did he graduate with 4 years at Purdue, a couple of years at MIT, and then 4 years with a prestigious job at Bell Labs. And the only thing I could think of was, Fred, you won the lottery. Take this guy right now. You'll be glad he did. He not only had a commercial radio license, he was a licensed ham, K9, MEL, or MAL, and he came to Fort Lauderdale. If I would have accepted a job, you would have never met Jim. And I'm really happy that I turned the job down. I'm happy that Jim and all of you have met Jim and enjoyed his life. Thank you.
I feel that was surely information we didn't know, and we appreciate it very much. Appreciate you sharing that with us. John Tramatanis, I think you wanted to say a few words.
I'm John, N4QO, and well, you can't really say a few words, but I'll try my best. I could have probably had a stack like this. A lot of you have covered some of the same themes, and it's kind of interesting that we all have some unique experiences with Jim, but most of them are common experiences because of the way he was and the way he treated people. I was blessed and fortunate to know Jim for a little over 33 years. When I was a younger ham, I first met him on the 440 Matt Park repeater. I broke in and introduced myself and was immediately welcomed and had a friend. And like a lot of stories here we heard was after getting to know him, his influence and his prodding. Shortly thereafter, I was a member of the North Fulton League back in those days and the Matt Park Club. I was quite green at the time, a little apprehensive how a literal novice, which I was, would be welcome into these clubs, but Jim made that acceptance easy. And of course, it was something we've seen repeated by him over the last 30 years. I have, for example, with Steve, and probably many of us all here. When we knew him, he urged us on, got us accepted, brought us in. He had his hand into almost all the local clubs at that time, and still did. North Fulton, North Georgia QRP, Southeast DX Club, Southeast Contest Club, and many activities with the schools, especially Mill Springs Academy, STEM events, Tech Fests, Ham Fest. That's just to name a few. We've heard all the accolades, the special Ham of the Year at Dayton. I was watching the ticker here, and he's rubbing shoulders with Nobel Prize winner Joe Taylor, ARRL presidents, heads of manufacturing ham companies. I've noticed NFJ's president. He knew them all, and he could use his influence with them all to help us with our events like Ham Jam, which he was a major champion of. But I want to share a few things, stories. I have many of them, but just ones I always remember of Jim off the main stage, which I think is where he really shined. What stood out about him, of course, as we all know, he was a helper and a motivator, an ambassador to ham radio, the consummate Elmer, and always making new hams welcome. If you encountered Jim on the repeater at Hungry Hams or at a club meeting, you would have witnessed his love for what I say, spreading the gospel of ham radio. As examples, I'd like to share some statements that made by Jim often that you're all likely familiar with. I'll reference here with some quotes paraphrased, but I'm just going to read a few of them off, and you can probably remember hearing him say that to you. Sure, you can do that. Here's all you have to do. That's not so hard. Come over and I'll show you how to do it. Or, all you need is a XXX, fill in the blank. I have some here. Come on over, I'll give you one. And, or just try it. It's not that difficult. I remember that my first field day ever was Matt Park down in Dunwoody, and nervous about getting in front of a rig and getting into like a real sort of a contest thing, which I'd never done. And of course, says, don't worry about it. You can do it. And you'll have fun. And I did. And I did. So he was always the owner. And as referenced here before by someone, I'll always remember the times I would ask a completely stupid question. I don't have a double E from MIT. And he would always explain it and answer in a way not to make you feel like it was a stupid question. With an answer like, no, not really, but here's how you can do it, or this is really how it works. And another thing was his encouragement. You know, if you shared with him a small accomplishment, you would always get an enthusiastic, that is great, from Jim. You know, always lifting you up, pushing you on. And as we've heard, he was a skilled technician and craftsman in the art of amateur radio. And that was evidenced by the innumerable projects underway and the gear present in his shack. A simple example of his skill, and this is one that always sticks out to me to this day, was on a visit to Zach Hadari's house. I think we may hear from Zach here soon. He's on the docket. He was a young ham at the time and had just gotten his first rig and license. And Jim recruited me to go over to his house in East Cobb to put up a wire antenna. And Jim he designed the antenna, had it all laid out, everything was set up. I tagged along to climb ladders and throw ropes and do all that stuff. And we got everything strung up, it was all done. Zach had the radio in like a closet in his room. And the last step was soldering the PL259 to the end of the coax after we got it through the window. Maybe not a big deal, but you know, I always tried to avoid that. If I could get it done with a pre-made terminal, I would. And whenever I would, especially starting out doing a PL259, I would pull the handbook out, look at the picture, and make sure I measured everything just right, and burn a finger or two. And but you know, it was the last line into the antenna, the crucial point. I didn't want it to fail. Well, when Jim did it, he pulls it out, and he's got the soldering iron, and he's talking to Zach the whole time, peppering him about, what are your plans to do with this radio? You know, what are you going to do? How are you going to operate? And he did it like he was tying a shoe. And I still marvel to that day, because after 33 years, I still worry about soldering a PL259. And he did it like he was eating breakfast. He goes, no, nothing to it. And it just always stuck with me. And besides being a master technician, he was an outstanding operator. I think we haven't heard a whole lot about that, but he lived right in my backyard, so to speak, in Roswell. I was in East Cobb, but right over the county line. We estimated it was about a third to a half a mile distance as the crow flies. And, you know, we hear each other very well. And one time on 10 meters, I heard W4QO, it says W4QO testing. And I went back to him. Turned out he was on his dummy load. And we got a good laugh out of that, but that's how close we were. But what it was he would operate a lot of CW, and if I was turning the dial and I'd hear a strong signal, but almost perfect CW, oftentimes, literally a couple times I thought it was W1AW. It was strong, it was pure, clean fist, and setting a pretty good rate. And at a rate that I normally couldn't copy, but because he sent it so purely, you know, I could copy at a faster rate. So it's kind of interesting, you know, that anomaly, if you will, because if someone sends good CW, you can copy it faster. He was like a machine. He really was. And I'm sure, I feel there was a lot of evidence of that. And he could score well in any contest, and often did. Doing it most times operating in the QRP category. As we all know, he loved that mode and class. Many times he would win a plaque in the Georgia QSO party. The few times he didn't were the years he would invite new hams to come over and Elmer them in contesting in the QSO party. And he'd have them operate his station with him during the contest. And although training and hosting these new ops would diminish his contest score, I think, as we know for Jim, having the guest owners was more enjoyable than scoring well in the contest, and he did that often. He was a great operator. And last April, in the Georgia QSO party, as Jim was going through some of his tougher times, he still managed to win and take home the Georgia QSO party plaque for QRP mixed mode for the state of Georgia. This is quite an accomplishment, even under the best of circumstances. And he never mentioned it, always humble. I was very lucky to have Jim as a neighbor, and oftentimes would stop by his place, either returning some gear he had lent me or vice versa. And he would show me some project he had going on his bench. One time I came by, and as I was leaving, he mentioned he was working on making power pole connections. I said, I've never done that, not really that interested. 5 minutes later, I'm sitting at the bench, and I'm making power poles for the first time. So, you know, that's how he got things done. And then I told a lot of officers in the club, most of them, but when I was activities manager and vice president, when you had to do meetings, and I know a lot of you have also held those positions, when the term would start, you would get an email from Jim, sometimes a comprehensive email, with suggestions of dozens of ideas of what to do for club meetings or what to do for activities. And they were good suggestions. But the unique thing about these suggestions was, as officers, we love to get a lot of suggestions, and we often get suggestions. But with Jim's, he said, and I will help you to do this. And he would help you do it, which is, you know, very commendable than just being the peanut gallery and suggesting. He was always right there to step up and get it done. And then and that was sort of the theme of him always wanting to help benefit the club. Last December, before Jim passed, Chuck and I went out to the hospital where he was at and to pay him a visit. And he asked us, you know, how's club meeting attendance going? And started giving us some ideas on getting more people to the meeting. I also informed Jim on that day that the code practice oscillator kit that he designed with some others in the club, but it's the CPO kit, we call it, CPO Keyer kit, with the circuit board that bears his call sign on it, had just eclipsed $4,000 in total revenue to the club since inception. And he digested the great news kind of straight-faced, and he proceeded to tell Chuck and I that we could and should be selling more of them. And by marketing it more aggressively and getting some more coverage in the magazines, always trying to better the club. Well, we're all aware how special Jim was because we were all hams with him, but I'm sure all who knew him, even outside of the context of ham radio, knew how special he was. On a somewhat non-ham anecdote, about 5 or 6 years ago, an ottoman in our bedroom, one of the legs broke on it. And it's not such a special deal, except it wasn't an expensive item because the leg broke on it after we had it for a couple of years, but it had 2 matching chairs with it, so it had to be fixed. So, being a ham, I figured I'd give it the try. I went on YouTube and Googled ways to repair this sheared leg and give it the old ham try. And I was just making it worse. So a few days later, I called Jim up and explained my situation. He said, bring it over this morning, we'll take a look at it. So I carried it down to his shop. He pulls out a hammer, some shims, some glue, and in about 20 minutes, he had me working at it, but in 20 minutes, we had it fixed. And 5 or 6 years later, it's working in my bedroom just fine. So his work is not only in my shack, it's in my bedroom too. So, and you know, we're going to miss Jim a lot. Over the New Year holiday, I was putting something to reheat in my microwave. We've been in our home for 23 years. It's the original microwave. It's built in the cabinet I hit go, boom, the microwave blew up, good. And I knew it was at minimum the internal fuse, but I'm sure it was the way the pop-it made, something had to cause it. And normally my first thought would have been to call my friend Jim to say, what do I need to do to safely do this? But alas, I had to bring up the microwave from the basement and lay it on the counter. Jim is missed, but he's always with us. So, 73, Jim, and hopefully the club will carry on your great legacy.
Thank you, John. Tim Lohman sent me a note that he'd like for me to read. He couldn't be here, he's got to be out of town, so I'll read what he sent me. A few years ago, the director of Camp Grace, David Pridemeyer, asked Jim if he could build beds for his Christian retreat camp in Middle Georgia. Jim said yes. I don't remember the exact number, but I think the total ended up being about 140 beds. Each bed was a bunk bed with a ladder to the upper bed. The beds would all be made from wood, Jim's specialty. Jim engineered the entire project himself. After all, he was an engineer. And of course, he couldn't do all the work by himself, so he enlisted help from friends at Fellowship Bible Church, ham radio buddies, and anyone else that he could convince to say yes. I saw huge amounts of raw lumber dropped off at Jim's driveway numerous times. A few days each week, there would be work parties inside, outside this wood shop, in the backyard, cutting lumber into bed parts, drilling needed holes, sanding smooth all the cuts and anything else to create all parts needed. Jim looked at each part carefully, making sure the wood did not have any knots or imperfections. I remember some days wondering how the parts that he was creating would even become part of a bed. Only Jim could see the whole picture. In time, all the parts were completed, and it was time to stain everything. Turns out, that's a lot of work in itself. We would all get a little cup and a brush. Jim would pour a small amount of stain in our cups, and we all went to work. One day, I was staining a large pile of parts when Jim came up from behind me and startled me. He almost yelled, saying, "You're using too much stain." I didn't understand because it seemed to me I was hardly using any stain at all. But Jim was adamant, so he took my brush and continued my job showing me how to do the stain. You know when you feel your brush is dry and needs more stain? Well, I watched Jim continue staining by pushing my brush hard into the wood, squeezing out all the additional stain from the brush and stain more wood. Then he smiled, telling me there's a budget for this stain and I was going to cause the project to go over cost. I continued staining his way and it worked. Jim really had every part of this project engineered down to the last dollar. The beds were delivered to camp in phases. It's a 2+ hour drive from here. On the last delivery, I was part of the team taking all the finished parts in multiple vehicles and setting up the beds inside each of the rooms around the fort area. I rode with Jim in his truck that day, hearing him talk about his Christian faith, then watching him lead the team to install all the beds was faith building for me. Today, I'm not sure how many kids have slept in those beds, and I'm not sure how many will sleep in those beds moving forward. I do know that Jim and his many skills filled a huge need for a Christian ministry so kids could sleep comfortably every night and not worry about their bedding. I was honored to be a small part of that large project with Jim. Thank you, Jim. Tim, W4QO. We have a video from Jackadary that we're going to play now. He is in California currently and obviously could not be here, but he wanted to make a video. Jim was one of the young men that he actually worked with a number of years ago. So we'll see if we can get this video going.
I knew Jim Stafford as a friend, mentor, and role model. Jim was probably one of the most influential figures in my life, and I couldn't thank him enough. Jim, along with everybody here at NFARL, introduced me to ham radio and put me on a path that led me to discovering my passion. Could not thank him enough, really. I really like Jim because he never judged my mistakes. He knew I was a kid and that I had no idea what I was doing, and mistakes came with being a kid and learning, and he was there for it all. And he was always there to help me whenever I needed it, and he was excited about it, and I love that about him. Because whenever there was a new concept or subject, he would go above and beyond. He wouldn't hesitate to explain. He would jump right into even the most like complicated things on the face of this earth. But that was Jim, and I love Jim. But whenever Jim walked into the room, you could feel this overwhelming excitement that came with him. You would watch him get really jittery and excited about sharing his passion, and that made me really excited about learning. And I really love that about Jim. He loved to pass on what he knew, and I think that really changed a lot on my perspective about what you can do with life, and made me realize that, hey, you can do whatever you want. Like, whatever brings you joy, it's there for you. He was the person that made me realize I can do whatever I want with life. He showed me that I can have fun and work on my career at the same time. He was the person that made me discover my passion, which was engineering. And seriously, like, if he was not there and if nobody was doing anything for the kids, like, I have no idea where I would have ended up. Because he really influenced me in a huge way. And it was the coolest thing. Like, we would both get really excited about a new concept and putting things together, and it was really fun. Every situation was exciting and fulfilling and made me want to do the best I could, and it made me want to do the most I could in my life. I'm so grateful for coming across Jim Stafford. Kind of a legendary name, in my opinion, but yeah, thank you so much for letting me speak. Have a great day.
Well, that was definitely how he affected young people. I mean, every time I would see Jim deal with young people, that was always the same response you would get from any of them. One thing that I do want to mention, and Jim would be unhappy because if I didn't mention this, this is about Jim, but it's also about his friends and other club members. Unfortunately, in the last just short period of time, the last few months, we have lost several other members. Bill Reed, K4YJI, Larry Bowden, AA4CC, and Gary Bush, W6GB. I know he would want me to mention them along with him because that would just be Jim. He would not be satisfied that this is just about him and not about some of them. I will be sending out some information on them later. I'm sure probably have read about their passion as well. I do want to say that when I moved here a number of years ago, I'd gotten out of ham radio. I was out in the business world doing things, and as all of us had done, there was a lull in the time. And when I moved here, I moved from Charlotte to Atlanta, to Roswell, and decided I would get back into ham radio. Looked around to find a club, and I found North Fulton, and I thought, well, that looks like a pretty active club. I think I will go visit that club. So I did. I found out where the meetings were going to be held. Went to the meeting, and sure enough, the first person that came up to me was Jim Stafford. I mean, it just was automatic. And I mean, you just could not help but become a friend with Jim just immediately. And that's how he affected everyone. but he always made you feel welcome. And that's the one thing about this club. It makes people feel welcome. And I think that has emulated from Jim. I think it's rubbed off on all of us because that's how Jim was. And he wants everyone to feel welcome. He wants everyone to be helped. And he was an amazing person that had an unbelievable background. I mean, you start looking at his educational background, and I mean, if you talk to Jim for a few minutes, you couldn't put all that together. You wouldn't think that, you know, here's a guy that had been at Bell Labs, graduated with a master's from MIT, the things that we all think about as engineers, you know, goodness gracious, but Jim's already done all of it. And so it's just pretty amazing. And you never got that feeling around Jim. He always made you feel like you were just like him, you know. He was never above you at all in any subject. And so Jim always made me feel welcome. And it is pretty funny, somebody said earlier about when you got a job, I think John was talking about this, you got a job in the club, you could expect a phone call from Jim. There's no question about that because Jim was a man of ideas, and he had a list of ideas, but he had the ideas, the solution, and ready to go to work. So every time I got involved in anything, I knew the phone call was coming, and it would be Jim. And we would have this long conversation about ideas, and I would get it accomplished. And so it was always funny. I looked forward to it. I always looked forward to having these great conversations. And then he would also call and say, okay, let's build some QRP radios. And so all right, Jim. So I'd go over to Jim's house, and we'd get all this stuff together. The funniest thing about Jim, if you've never been to Jim's house in his basement, well, Jim's got a parts storage area that most towns would just kill for. I mean, it goes quite a ways, and there are a lot of parts there. And so Jim will say, well, part so-and-so is back there. If you go back there, look behind this radio on the shelf three sections down, 2 to the left, you'll find that piece right back there. He knew where everything was. It's pretty amazing. I could not have found anything, but he knew where all those parts was, and I think he had a part that would fit in almost anything. And he had just a complete assortment of radios. It was just fascinating to ever go to Jim's shack, and he just invited everybody to the shack at any time. And he did some amazing woodworking projects, and we both had the common interest in woodworking, building stuff, or anything to do with radios, or any kind of task, and just had some great conversations. He was just such an easy person to sit and talk with and visit with. And one thing I will have to say about Jim, you never had to guess what Jim was thinking, because Jim would tell you. I mean, you were going to know immediately if you thought it, you were going to know it. So we will all miss Jim, but Jim's legacy will move on in this club, and we will be that rock that takes that ripple out to a lot of other people who then can take it somewhere else. So what he put together will continue for a long time, and I know that there's no question that God brought him into this group. We've got a final closing that we'd like to do for Mike Roden, because Mike's going to do something with Morse code. That would please Jim tremendously. So with that, I will invite Mike up.
Good evening, and somber that we're here, but it's also a very joyous event. Jim, yeah, do that again. I'll quit moving my hand in front of my face. I consider Jim to be a very good friend, We had an opportunity to have many QSOs on the radio, both on phone and on CW. Jim stands as my first ever CW contact on 12 meters. So that was the initial contact to get me my DXCC on 12 meters. So I appreciate him for that. But he and I always had lots of conversations about repeaters, getting the Matt Park stuff fixed and on the air. In addition to field day opportunities, as was said already, Jim had more ideas coming out of his head faster than you could process them. Those of you that are Morse code operators, you know the structure of the exchange. You send the other person's call, DE your call, and when it's the end of the transmission, you use the pro sign SK to signal that that's the end of the transmission. So tonight, I will make this the final QSO for Jim and for Bill and for Gary. You hear that yet? All right, here we go.
Thank you, Mike. I think Alicia would like to say something on Zoom. We're going to try to work that out. So, Mike, see if you can get her hooked up there on Zoom. Alicia, if you hear us, Mike's trying to get that done for you.
Mike, just hold the speaker, microphone up to the speaker. Yeah, hang on.
Well, we can hear you, so just hang on a second. Hold the stand. There you go.
Just want to say a big thank you to everybody for just sharing tonight, and I've just been having issues here on that. And you guys are all so sweet, and I know how important you all were to my dad. So, and I shared on the Zoom chat that it's so nice to just see the pictures and just see him do what he loves. And So I wrote him a little something on the Facebook, and if you want to look me up, it's Alicia Stafford O, and I have some pictures on there too, but I'll just read that for you. And again, thank you so much for how important you were to my dad. Let's see, I just put my dad as my hero, his legacy as well. He embodied godly love. I believe my relationship with God is what it is today, because my dad made something tangible, tangible, real. I don't think too many people can say that about their dad. He was the leader of our family, always making sure that we're taken care of. I think part of why he fought so hard over the last 6 years, pancreatitis, sarcoma, and multiple cancers. Sorry, I'm not to be able to talk. Was to be there for all of us, especially my mom. The love and friendship that he shared with my mom for over 55 years is this kind of great love stories. And, you know, I just say my dad was there. He always showed up. And it wasn't just with a highlight reel. When things were hard, and when things were good. James, 1 Corinthians 13 uses the word charity for love. As you all know, and I know you all came up from the wood shop and helped out, he led by example. He showed his love by acts of service. And I've heard all kinds of numbers thrown around. There was some plaque that said 120 beds, but I've heard up to 140, so we'll go with whatever number that is. But it was amazing to see him just orchestrate an army of volunteers, which included a lot of you guys, to make that happen and to help George's underserved. And, you know, and as you guys probably may not even be aware, but he and my mom very diligently gave to church and charity, and they acknowledged that, you know, what was bestowed upon them was really not theirs. It was from God, and it was meant to be shared. And so I just have so many wonderful memories and always treasure them. And I am, because who I am, because he invested in me. And I had a couple of quick funny memories. Well, first of all, I think from all these pictures, we can all see that his smile just lit up the room. And he just always shared that genuine joy with people. And that I'm the nerd I am today with an industrial engineering degree because he encouraged me to be a nerd, and I've been able to parlay that into, you know, providing for my family, and I attribute so much of that to my dad. And I remember riding in the big old Cadillac down to NFARL South where he would go to work and I was doing an internship. Some of my favorite memories of that. And then kites. I was at the beach recently and I was flying a kite, and I thought about how he loved flying kites. He had the little two-handle thing, you could steer it and everything. And so I was like, oh, I need to go in the basement. And at the basement with all the stuff and get those kites out and get back on the beach. And I think he was smiling down at us flying a kite recently. And but you were right about him knowing exactly where everything is, because I'm completely disorganized just like he was. But I can about 99% of the time tell you exactly where something is amidst the chaos. And then, let's see, I wanted to share one last funny thing, and that is that he actually figured out that my last dog, who was a rescue dog, she was a Chihuahua mix, he's the one who figured out that she could sing, because he was singing "Oh Susanna" to her, and she started yelping and singing. So we got some of the funniest videos of him with the dog. And we said, well, if we ever need to have you committed, we have the evidence right here. So, on it. laugh and to say thank you so much for putting this together and just sharing my dad with me and you.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you very much, Alicia. And I thank everyone for coming tonight and all those who have been on Zoom to share in this wonderful celebration of Jim. And Jim, we will remember you always, 73.
We're gonna leave the video running. We're gonna focus on the screen.
Yeah, we'll leave the video running. And what we want to do now, we can share with each other. Be sure and go over and eat all these goods that are left so we don't have anything we've got to carry home. So you can have this will be your evening snack over here. Yes, you can. And by the way, anybody else that wants to come up and make a comment, we'll take anybody's comment.
I don't know how many of you go out in search of papers, WAS, worked all zones, but Jim Stafford did 5-band DXCC on 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 in QRP mode. That's less than 5 watts. That's a real accomplishment.
If we have anybody else wants to say anything, we're more than welcome to invite you up. You got some?
Hi, my name is Skip. I'm K4IXO, and I'd like maybe give you a little bit of different perspective because I've heard so much from you people here tonight and spent so much time with Jim. I'm envious of you. I'd like to tell you even how much effect that he had on me, even just knowing Jim kind of casually. I got back into ham radio about 8 years ago. I got my first license when I was a teenager, but I went to the NFARL, I went to like one of you guys was talking about looking for a club, and I went to North Fulton, and like Jim's charisma, when you walk in the door, you just kind of, it's like, this is the guy. It wasn't, it was like, he's a star. And so I got to know Jim a little bit through the club. And then I had the great opportunity, he invited me, he found out I was going to drive up to the Dalton Ham Fest, and he said, well, I'm going too, why don't we carpool together? So he and I hooked up and we drove up to Dalton together, so I had the opportunity to spend the whole day with him. And then when we got to the Ham Fest, it was like everybody there knew it. It was like you were walking around with a rock star, everybody came up, everybody knew Jim. And the guy just, he lit up a room anywhere he went. And, I've had, he was responsible. I was the net control for the Tech Talk for several months, and Jim was the one that kind of suggested, hey Skip, why don't you do this, man? You can do it. And he always helped me out, gave me ideas for program topics, and that side of things. So even though I didn't know Jim the years and years that a lot of you guys have, and I probably not more than 10 or 15, 20 hours maybe total that I had the opportunity to spend with him. But even just that casual relationship, he had a profound impact on my life, both personally and as a ham operator. And I really felt compelled to come here tonight and pay my respects and tell all of you. I know how much it meant to you. I feel the same way. So 73, Jim, and we'll do our best to maintain your memory and keep your spirit going.
Anyone else? All right, if not, let's enjoy the snacks.